Development Center in that we offer no fee consulting to small businesses. So if you've never heard of us, that isn't necessarily shocking. But on the other hand, this might be an introduction to you for the first time knowing what a Small Business Development Center does. So we actually have people register with us to become a client. Information is confidential. We offer advice and input and tools to help small businesses. In this case, you're being introduced to us because of the fact that we're going through this extraordinary time frame associated with the COVID-19 situation and crisis. And the topics for today are to focus specifically on SBA loans under the EIDL, or Economic Injury Disaster Loans Program. So you might hear us refer to EIDL, or even shorter yet and a little easier to say, EIDL is the name that we're coining for that Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that we'll be going into in more detail today. We have a presenter direct from the SBA, Twyla Kennedy, who will be doing that presentation and helping field questions associated with that. The second portion of today's webinar will be focused on what can you do within your business today to try to be helping ensure that you're trying to adapt and perform business intelligence and strategic efforts to help you be as successful as possible during this crisis timeframe. And Deb McGregor, a consultant for our Small Business Development Center in this region, is going to be presenting that particular part. So we'll do it in that order. We're going to be talking about the economic injury disaster loans first, and then we'll be talking about broader, what can you do within your business to help with its health and success during the crisis. I'll give a little bit more of a description about the topic. There are other loans from the SBA other than the economic injury disaster loans, or EIDL loans. Some of those are referred to as, for instance, the PPP Act or the FFCRA Act. Those are acronyms as well. The PPP one, as an example, stands for the Payroll Protection Program. That program is out in a description form only. It's not yet open for loans to be submitted or applications to be received by the SBA, as an example. So we aren't going to be talking about those much today. We could answer some of the broad brushstroke questions. But for the most part, if you're interested in the PPP or the FFCRA loans that were part of the CARES Act, the $2.3 trillion act that was just approved last Friday and signed last Friday, those guidelines for SBA loans are not yet final. Some of those guidelines are out in a first draft form and available for public feedback as part of the process for getting to final, but are not yet to a point where there would be applications received. So just as an FYI, we're not going to go into detail on the PPP or the FFCRA loans. Those, because the rules are not final, the information that you are urged to go read about and learn about are on the SBA website. And if you were to put in PPP loan, for instance, on a browser, you would be taken right to where the SBA describes how that loan is intended to work in the broad brushstroke. But what it doesn't have is the details for how the SBA loans are going to be submitted and approved, for instance. So that's key for just the Q&A and that sort of thing. We're not trying to deflect those questions, meaning we're fearful of those answers, more so the fact that those answers are not yet final and only the broad brushstroke information is available. So we're going to focus most on the economic injury disaster loans, or EIDL loans, and Twyla Kennedy is going to be the first presenter for us. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Twyla, and I'm going to introduce her because her role is the lead economic development specialist for the Minnesota District Office of the United States Small Business Administration. And she's going to go through the economic injury disaster loan overview and some of the information that she's been receiving most of the questions and clarifications around for us over about the next 15-20 minutes. And so with that, Twyla, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Matt. I think you guys can hear me. My name popped up as being the talker, so that's a good thing. So first of all, I'd really like to say a huge thanks to Matt and Amy for hosting today. They are our experts in the Moorhead area, and we're really grateful for the help that they're providing the small businesses around all of the SBA disaster programs. Just a little bit about SBA for those that may not know. We are a federal agency. We have an office here in Minnesota, and we're located in downtown Minneapolis when we actually show up at a physical location. And there's an office like us all around the United States. So if you happen to not be in Minnesota listening in, there is going to be an office in your state. You just need to look up on our SBA.gov website for your local office. And there are 10 of us here in Minnesota. We cover the whole state, which is why we really depend on folks like the SBDC to help while we're out in the more far-flung areas of the state. So today we are definitely talking about the EIDL disaster loan and the EIDL advance. So this was all set up, as Matt said, as part of the CARES Act. And we are currently taking applications for both of those programs. You want to go ahead and advance, Amy? All right, so this is a working capital loan program, and it's a disaster loan. So the difference is, for those of you who may have worked with SBA on a guaranteed loan product and you worked with a lender, or 504 and you worked with a certified development company, these loans are different. They are done directly by SBA. The funds come from Treasury. Because they are direct loans, there is no cost to apply for them. And I like to point out that there isn't an obligation to take the loan if offered. So, I mean, obviously this is a disaster that we have no idea beginning and what it's going to look like. So if you get approved for this loan, you are not obligated to take it. Next slide. So from an eligibility standpoint, you need to be either a for-profit small business or a private nonprofit. And with the way the disaster has kind of worked its way out, pretty much anybody is going to have been touched by the disaster and would therefore be eligible. And just so you know, in this particular program, you're not going to be asked to provide an amount of the loan that you would like to take out. Instead, the loan officer at the Disaster Loan Center is going to review your documentation, and they're going to make a decision on the amount of the loan and the term. Next slide. So I will tell you that this set of slides, I've updated them a few times, initially came out back about 10 days ago. And so, of course, we were seeing, you know, that particular list of eligible businesses as being the ones most impacted. But of course, now that we've gone through a couple of weeks, we can see that pretty much everybody is going to be impacted. So for small, for this particular program, small is being defined as any employer that has less than 500 employees and was in operation as of the 1st of February. So if you're an employer that has over 500 employees, you may still fall under the SBA small business size standards. So my suggestion for any of those employers, if they happen to be on the call, is to check out the link there for the table of size standards. And based on the type of industry, it could either be determined by the number of employees or by the annual revenues. Another nice thing about that particular website is it does give you an idea how do you count employees? What's being looked at when you talk about employees? And it also tells you how to determine annual revenues. All right, so private nonprofit eligibility. Basically, any private nonprofit is eligible. We get a lot of questions on what does that look like, and you see there are a list of some. The suggestion that we have for any private nonprofit that's not sure, is to just go ahead and do the application process. When I get to those slides, I have a couple of slides on some of the application process. It takes about, I would say, less than a half an hour to go through the slides or to go through the pages and provide the information. And that will give you a more clear picture of your eligibility. Next slide. So there are some ineligible entities, one being agricultural enterprises. That's kind of been described to us as if you grow it, feed it, or water it, it's more than likely going to be considered an agricultural enterprise that would not be eligible, except for agricultural aquaponics. So agricultural aquaponics would be eligible. Next slide. All right, so the terms of the loan. So the loans can be done for up to $2 million at a 3.75% for small businesses, 2.75% for nonprofits, and the term is going to be up to 30 years. There is a deferment of 12 months from the date of the note, during which time you will not be required to make payments, but interest will be accruing. Also, there are no prepayment penalties on the loan. So if you get things back up and running and decide that you don't want to continue paying on the debt, then you can go ahead and just pay it back in full, and there will be no prepayment penalty for that. One thing that changed here recently was that for loans over $25,000, they are required to be secured. So rather than looking at real estate, which is what SBA normally does, they're now going to take basically a UCC1 filing on all business assets. So there will be a fee of $100 for the UCC filing, but that's basically that's the only fee that comes out, and that's just to cover the cost of the filing and the processing. So as you notice there, the loan funds can be used to pay for things like payroll, rent and mortgage payments, material costs. If you've got some pre-existing debt, like you've purchased a piece of equipment, you could use it to make that loan payment, except not if it's an SBA loan. So that would be your regular commercial loan. And just keep in mind, really what we're looking at is what kind of costs go into you keeping the doors of your business open. That's really what the use of the loan funds is about. So terms, as far as the loan itself, the SBA is going to be looking at things like, just a moment here. Oh, okay, sorry about that. We just redid the slides. So as far as the disaster loan, there is a loan advance. So the EIDL loan advance is basically becomes a grant. So it's a non-repayable, so you don't have to repay the advance. It'll be up to $10,000. Once the advance once the application is received and approved, the advance would get deposited into your checking account within 3 to 5 business days. And just keep in mind, even if you eventually end up getting denied for your disaster loan, there's still not a requirement to repay the advance. One thing to let everybody know is if you already submitted, so the portal that I'm going to show you later is about our third iteration of application. So if you applied early, what you're going to want to do is go back into this portal and submit this particular application. At the very last page is a checkbox where you say you want the advance, and then you just submit that. And what they will do in the Disaster Center then is connect your new application with your previously submitted application so that you don't lose your place in the queue. But if you submitted before Monday, Monday was basically about the first day that you could submit in the new portal. If you submitted your loan application before Monday, you won't have access to the advance unless you go in and resubmit. And basically the loan advance funds use of proceeds is the same as for the regular disaster loan. Okay, next slide. All right, this is where I thought we were going to be with the last slide. So SBA is going to be looking at a couple of things. So there's credit history and repayment ability. So we're going to be pulling a credit report to get a credit score. And we've been told by the folks in disaster not to get too concerned about the credit score because they're also looking at repayment ability. Keep in mind there will be personal guarantees required on loans over $200,000. And that was a recent change. It was when the program first started, they were taking personal guarantees on all of the loans. They recently changed it, so only loans over $200,000 are going to require a personal guarantee. And as far as the collateral, there is a requirement of collateral on any loans over $25,000. Next slide. All right, so this slide shows the first page of the updated streamlined process. So if you go to that particular link, which this is now the application link, the COVID-19relief.sba.gov, and you see there are 5 bubbles. The first, I'm going to show you a couple of screens showing what's on the disclosure pages. The business information page is going to ask for basic business information. It'll ask for your annual revenues. It's going to ask for annual cost of goods sold, and if you've had any losses from lack of rent being paid. The next screen, which is the business owner's information, that is going to cover all of the things for any of the owners of the company. So anybody that's got well, actually any owner needs to fill it out. The guarantees are going to be required on the owners that have more than a 20% interest in the business. And then the additional information page, there are 3 questions that go to kind of what I would consider character. Things like whether you've been suspended or debarred from doing business with the government, if you happen to be on parole, those sorts of things. It also has, this is also where you'll find the checkbox where you can request the advance. And then at the bottom of the page, it's going to ask for your routing and bank information, and that's so that they can make the direct deposits of the disbursements. And you will get an opportunity, there's a summary page there that you'll get an opportunity to see what you entered in, and then if you need to go back and make any edits, you can do that. So go ahead and go to the next screen. So this is the top of the disclosure page, and what you'll see on there is you're going to be asked to basically choose one of those entities. Keeping in mind that this particular form is being used for millions of businesses, if your entity doesn't fit into a neat little bubble, try to choose the one that best represents your particular business. Next screen. So this is the bottom portion of the screen. The thing I think it's important to recognize there is that you need to be able to put a check mark in every single one of those 7 boxes. This is where you would potentially get kicked out for not being eligible. As you're filling it out, and actually at any point as you're filling out the updated application, if you notice at the bottom of that screen, there is a customer service 800 number and a disaster customer service at SBA.gov email address. Those are the best places to go to get some of these questions answered. We're more than happy to try to provide you with the best assistance that we can in the district office, and I know Matt and Amy and their SBDC consultants we're doing the best we can to answer some of the questions, but we're not the ones making decisions on eligibility, and so sometimes your best answer is going to be directly from the Disaster Loan Center. When they did this updated web portal for applying, they also created a more robust call center. They brought in a whole bunch of people, and they created a 2-tier system, so simple questions can get answered initially. Other questions would get sent then up to the tier 2 people. So what I'm hearing is that the portal isn't crashing and that people are getting through relatively quickly to find out about their applications. And the other thing too, when you get to the end of the application, you're going to get a loan number. It's just going to pop, a screen's going to pop up and say, this is your loan number. You're going to probably want to do a screenshot of that. And this phone number and email address is where you would go if you wanted to check on the status of your loan. Next slide. So a couple of tips here about your application. One of the important things to do is to make sure that you try to be as complete and accurate as you can. One thing you'll notice in the way that this portal was set up, there is a red bar on all of the fields that need to be filled in. So when you go through the process and you hit that particular section, anything with the red bar, you have to provide information, and the bar will turn green when it has when it feels it has enough information. So for instance, if you're putting in a social security number, the bar is not going to turn green until you have enough numbers in there to match a social security number. And there are fields that don't need to be filled in, that's fine. But when you get to the bottom of the screen and the next button isn't highlighted for you to move along, you just need to go back up to the top and see which fields you forgot to fill in. And again, if there's any fields that you don't know how to fill in, or there's not information for you, you may need to contact the disaster customer service folks to ask that question. We have a lot of people that ask about changing the loan amount. So when you get to the end, or once your application has been approved, SBA will notify you of what your loan amount is and what your term. If you get that information and you feel that that's not right or that you need more, you do have an opportunity to submit some supporting documentation and a narrative and request an increase. Same goes for if you get your loan approval and decide that you don't need as much money as you've been provided, you can ask simply to have that amount reduced. And finally, a denial. So unfortunately, some people may get a denial. If that happens, you're going to get a reason for the denial, and you'll have two opportunities to provide some supporting documentation and some narrative on why you think that the denial was wrong and why you should instead be approved for the loan. So just keep in mind that when you get the denial, there'll be a reason and there'll be a process for you to go back in and do a reconsideration. Next slide. All right, so these are our SBA resource partners. All of these partners that we have been in partnership with for years, in excess of 30 years. I think most of our programs, maybe not the WBC program, but most of the other programs have been around for a very long time. These folks receive grant funding from SBA to provide no-cost technical assistance, consulting, and mentorship all the time. So it's not just, these services aren't just around the disaster. These are just even for everyday questions that you might have. So of course the SBDC, which Matt and Amy are a part of, we have 9 centers around the state. So we're able to serve pretty much every corner of Minnesota. We have a number of SCORE chapters. I don't believe there's a SCORE chapter in Moorhead, but I know that the SCORE chapter out of St. Cloud has some mentors that serve fairly far north. We don't have a women's business center in St. Cloud, or excuse me, in Moorhead, but we do have one in Little Falls. So anybody that happens to be kind of at the southern part of maybe the SBDC region, or if you're a little farther south, you may be able to tap into the resources of the Women's Business Alliance Central out of Little Falls. And then we have a regional Veterans Business Outreach Center. So our outreach center is actually located in Wisconsin with one of their women's business centers, but they have access to and knowledge of veterans resources in Minnesota. So if you do happen to be a veteran, it's a good place to make a connection, because they may have some other resources for you that nobody else is aware of. Next slide. All right, and I'm going to touch just briefly. We do have, we like to share the resources that are available from the state of Minnesota, because they are in the process of putting together actually one of the loan programs is already in place, the Small Business Emergency Loan. That particular loan program it's not our loan program, so I can't get too deep in the weeds on it, but I can tell you that it's for those businesses that were affected by the 2 executive orders that Governor Walz put in place. So things like bars and restaurants and breweries and salons, massage parlors, you know, those sorts of people that were very early on told that they needed to shut down their places of business are eligible for the emergency loan program. The guarantee program, they're in the process of getting that up and running, and that will be open to a much broader group of people. And what the state is trying to do is trying to help fill some of the gaps where potentially the SBA is not going to be able to help, because there is a lot of need. I'm talking to business owners every day, and the need is huge. So I know that the state of Minnesota is looking to figure out how do they help fill some of those gaps. Next slide. And then these are just some of the health resources that the state has available if you're an employer and you're trying to figure out, you know, how to maybe share information with your employees and make sure they stay healthy. This is a good place for you to look. And the next slide. Oh, this slide is sad. So scams and fraud. Unfortunately, with the way things are changing, and you know, I think people are just taking advantage of the stress level that all of our small business owners are under, and we are hearing about scams on a regular basis. I don't know if some of you heard there was a scam that was reported on KARE 11 where somebody received an email from SBA. It looked like it was from SBA, telling them that they needed some personal information. And there was another scam that went out that somebody received that said that if they provided their credit card number, that they would do the online application for them for the low fee of $97. Well, the SBA, the application process is easy. With the help of the SBDC consultants, most people should be able to fill it out. You don't need to pay somebody to do the application process for you. So if you see anything like that, be very wary. And then the most recent one that I just heard about this morning was an email that goes out from an email address, or the email address in the text is something along the lines of SBA.help. SBA's employees are going to have an email address that ends in SBA.gov. So if you see anything besides that from SBA, again, remember, it's not going to be an SBA employee that's contacting you. So just be very careful. And if you are contacted by somebody, the last screen here, I think the next one coming up, is going to talk about how you can contact SBA. Yep, there we go. So that is our SBA address there, minneapolis.mn@sba.gov. If you get contacted by somebody with a scam like that, please let us know. We are doing our best to try to let the powers that be make them aware of it, so those people can be investigated and you know, have the appropriate actions taken against them. So with SBA, we are trying to keep people as up to date as we possibly can. So that SBA.gov updates address is our newsletter. So if you go out there and put in your zip code, that will get you access to the SBA Minneapolis newsletter. And the information that goes out there is going to be specific to Minnesota. As well, we have a Twitter feed at SBA_Minnesota. And our public affairs specialist is doing a really good job of sending stuff out regularly with all of the new changes. The 2 email addresses below, the minneapolis.mn, that is local here to Minneapolis. So that would be one of my 9 colleagues answering those emails. And then the disaster customer service at SBA.gov is the disaster customer services address as well. So the one other piece of advice that I have been giving to small business owners, because as I've been going on calls, I have been talking to a lot of people at the county and the city levels, as well as the folks at DEED. So sign up for SBA's newsletter, sign up for the Department of Employment and Economic Development newsletter, sign up for the city newsletter, sign up for the county newsletter. At all levels of government, people are looking at how can we help our small businesses. Some of them are putting in place gap funding. It might be loans, it might be grants, it just might be some other way that they're finding to assist their small businesses. but if you don't sign up and get their newsletters, you're not going to know what's available. And so to me, that's the best way that you can stay connected with available resources. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Matt and Amy.
All right, thank you very much, Twyla. I have been monitoring the chat a little bit, and so Twyla, I'm going to pose some questions. We'll let you take a crack at them first. I'll join in if there's sort of supplemental information that I know. But the first one that I noticed that was submitted said, is the $10,000 advance EIDL loan forgiven if you get a PPP loan? I've read different things and want to be clear.
So that is a very good question. And the answer to that, unfortunately, right now is I don't know. And the reason I say that is because I have the PPP rules are in process of being approved. And so I haven't seen them yet. So I'm not exactly sure what the connection with the PPP and the EIDL is going to be.
At the moment, just the EIDL in standalone. Twyla, clarify if you think I misstate, but that it is thought of as though the $10,000 advance that you are eligible for if you've submitted just this week since Monday for the SBA EIDL loan is thought of as though it will be forgiven and
That's
doesn't
correct.
necessarily have a dependency on other things. So the asterisk in your answer is there could be language in the upcoming PPP program that changes that slightly. But we'd have to get that PPP program details written and documented and actually out to the public enough to know.
Yes, so as of right now, it's the only thing you apply for is the EIDL and the EIDL advance. And keep in mind the EIDL advance, so they call it advance. I mean, it's up to $10,000, it's forgivable. It's basically an advance on the loan that you're going to get. So as of right now, you know, what I can tell you is that's the only thing you apply for, that piece is forgivable. Once the PPP comes into play, I'm not exactly sure what the connection then becomes and how it's all going to be viewed. And I will say that, I mean, I saw the legislation that came out last week on Friday. Then I saw that it changed. There was some language in it that changed up a little bit, even just a few hours later. So unfortunately, what's happening is that as people better digest what's happening, some of the interpretation has changed, which is why I don't want to interpret what I think is going to come out in the final rules.
So your SBA colleagues in Washington are busily creating the PPP and other loans that were part of the CARE Act, other programs, I should say, and that those are not finalized yet, cannot be applied for quite yet. In anticipation, maybe tomorrow, but even so, we're waiting for all that to get finalized before we can really answer detailed questions on those.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way to describe it, Matt. You know, we don't know what we don't know is kind of the way it is. One thing I will say that for somebody that's potentially interested in the PPP, if you go to SBA's website, you can view and keep in mind, it's a sample paper document. So, you know, the idea is, of course, none of us in our offices, so no one's going to show up in an office with a piece of paper. This system should be online. You know, our understanding is that the process itself is going to be online, kind of the way this portal is. But you can see, if you go out there, there is a sample paper document that would give you some ideas what information is going to be necessary.
However, that will be by, it won't be online direct to the small business, right? It will be online where a lender helps you with it?
Yeah, so the small business owner is going to be providing the information to the lender, because the SBA is not involved with the Paycheck Protection Program. That program is going to be handled via, in Minnesota, we have a bunch of 7A lenders, guaranteed lenders, and there's a list of them on our website. So if you wanted to see who is going to be eligible to do this program, you could go out and check that out. But they will be handling all of the details.
All right, so there are there were a couple other questions that sort of relate very closely, so I'm going to jump around very slightly. But one of the questions is, if I had submitted prior to Monday and I either hadn't felt as though I got a confirmation or that kind of information, what should I be doing now?
So if it was me and I submitted last week and I'm not real confident, because what I can tell you is we heard that there were some people that submitted last week and got like part of the way through and were assigned a loan number but didn't get to the submission process, and then the system crashed. The SBA, from my understanding, was not able to recreate those loans. So my advice to anybody that went in last week and did not completely get through to a complete submission, I would go back in. The process is quick. If you go in and you re-enter and there is already an application for you, they're going to marry the two applications. So they're going to take what you put in most recently and bring it up to wherever your application is at in the queue. So to me, it doesn't do any damage to go in. If you haven't been in there since Monday, it's not damaging to you to go back in and re-enter, and it will give you some level of confidence that you have a loan application in there and that you have an application in for the loan advance.
The portion that makes anyone eligible for the loan advance was only part of submissions that have happened since Monday. Is that accurate?
Yes. So anything that was submitted, because keep in mind the advance, the EIDL advance, was actually part of the legislation that got signed on Friday. So prior to the weekend, the advance was not part of the economic injury disaster loan. That only came into being via the legislation from last week, which is why those who applied early and were lucky enough to get in the queue early, unfortunately weren't eligible for the advance. What they need to do is just to go back into this portal, quickly enter the information, check the advance button, and then submit. And again, what will happen is you won't lose your place in line, but it will bring that advance application up to wherever you're at in the queue, and then you'll have access to both the loan and the advance.
Great. I'm going to then go to, I think it's a question, and it seems to be that nonprofit organizations, specifically 501c6, and whether or not they might be eligible.
All right, so I have to admit, I'm no tax guru. So I would say the original training that we received, they said if you're filing federal taxes as a 501c, D, or E, that you should apply. So I would say the best way to find out if you're eligible is to go in and apply. So as a 501c6, I mean, that you filed as a 501c, it doesn't necessarily say that it's just a 501c3. I would say go ahead and apply.
All right. I've heard that the PPP loan asks if you have any other emergency loans. Is the intent of that applicant is the intent that an applicant can only submit for one or the other?
So that is not my understanding. I believe they asked that question, and you're going to find on the EIDL application, there is a question about whether you've received disaster funds from any other source as well. The idea is more that we're trying to make sure that, that there's enough funding for everybody. So for instance, if your insurance covered the pandemic and you were able to get some insurance proceeds, that you would want to put that in the application when it asks for that, because what we're trying to do is make sure that we're balancing so that everybody has access to funding. So it's not necessarily going to be, hey, you're not going to get access, but it's more, we may balance that out against how much you would get knowing that you've got these other sources of income coming in.
All right, there is another question that is unique to the PPP program, but I think we will simply bump that and say that the SBA information that is out so far is all we've got, and won't be able to speculate necessarily to answer another detailed question there.
Hey, Matt.
And yes.
So what you and Amy might want to do if you're sending an email out after this is maybe provide the link to the PPP information on the SBA's website. I mean, so people can at least take a look and see what's out there in case it does answer any questions that they have.
Yep, we were planning to follow up with a PDF of the slide deck and of some of the other resources and things. So we will plan to inform people that have been part of this webinar as well. We are having it recorded. If we've applied for the emergency loan but have not yet submitted the EIDL application, will the $10,000 be deducted from the EIDL loan, and will it still be forgivable? I'm going to take a stab at that. It's one process right now. The EIDL process and the $10,000 advance process are one and the same submission. So you go through the exact same screens. You don't you don't do only part of it or something. Run through that entire thing, submit the entire thing. That's what makes you eligible for both segments of the loan. Is that fair enough?
Yep. It's one, and just so that's why they call it an advance. So it is an advance on the loan. So let's say that you had gone through the process and you qualified for a $50,000 loan, and you qualified for a $10,000 and a $10,000 advance. What would happen is you would get that first $10,000 within the first 3 to 5 days, and then you would get the rest of it, the other $40,000, at some point after that. And I don't know how long it's taking them to finish, to get the rest of the disbursement out, but just as an example. So that's why they call it in advance. So, and then what happens is the first $10,000 that you got is the forgivable portion. The second portion, the $40,000, that becomes the loan that you would be making payments on.
All right. If I have multiple business loans or relationships with multiple lenders, like a commercial loan or an EDA or an EDC loan, which one would I apply for a loan through?
So it sounds like what you're referencing is that you have potentially you have access to multiple loans. Honestly, so I get this question from some folks, and my response is that might be one of those things that you want to go in and talk to Matt or one of the consultants, because I think what you want to be careful of is how much debt that you take on at this time. So I think it's a really good opportunity to sit down with somebody that can look at your finances and help you make the best decision that you can.
Yep, I'll clarify as well, because that's a great step. We're happy to have you register to be a client. We'll also have that information once again in the slide deck. And I'll take a little different tack at what might be the answer, which is that although you might have relationships with multiple banks, this next step, especially PPP, you're going to be having to go and try and pursue a PPP loan only from those people that are able and already set up to do SBA lending. Banks can pursue becoming an SBA lender if they haven't been one in the past, but that will take them a few days. So right at the moment, if you are going to be pursuing the PPP loan coming up, which has still detail and things to become available, that is something that you'll want to be making sure that whoever you're working with is already an SBA lender, very likely, because that will make it so that you can pursue that as quickly as possible.
And Matt and Amy will be able to supply you with a link to the list of SBA's guaranteed lenders.
Yep. Does a SBA Form 413 personal financial statement and 2202 liabilities need to be submitted at the time of the streamlined application?
So with the streamlined application, there is no point in there where they're asking for any documentation. And I'm not, because they changed the process now, I'm not exactly sure what they're going to be asking for documentation. It sounds like it's going to be fairly light on that, so I wouldn't get too worried about having to submit any of the original documentation that we were working with last week. And just as a kind of a frame of reference, because SBA does disaster lending all the time, those documents that we were using last week, those are the documents that we always use for physical disasters. So when we set up the economic injury disaster loan program, we were just pulling forward the things that we had been doing for the disaster, for the physical funding. I'm not sure if they work in this system, so I'm not 100% sure that they're even going to be asking for any of those documents in this process.
They likely could be forms that once you've submitted, if they come back and are, especially if the loan is a greater number, I wouldn't be surprised if they might ask you for one of those forms. But since we don't know for sure, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to go fill them out right away. But if you are going to get an EIDL loan, they will, after your submission, come back and likely ask for some sort of more information. The forms could be part of it. That's still fair, Twyla?
As far as I know, all of the training that I got from the disaster people was before they even started taking applications for EIDL. So I don't know for sure what they're coming back with for documentation now.
Right. Okay. So we are doing a recording of this. I'll mention that again because there's a couple questions still in here. Eligible lenders, for eligible SBA lenders, you said there's a list of that on the Minnesota SBA website, and we can make sure to do a link to that. And
I can send that out now.
Is it largely anybody who already does SBA lending, Twyla, or is it thought of as a more shorter list of those that do a lot of it, or what's your explanation there?
So my understanding is that it's all of the folks that do our regular guaranteed lending in the 7A program. So it's not any, we have our express lenders that do our special express loans. And then we have some lenders that are preferred lenders, but the lenders that can do the PPP is going to be all of the lenders eligible to do guarantee loans.
All right. A question about where you see the $10,000 referenced in the submission. It's on the final page. It is a checkbox, and then right underneath it, you put in your business bank account and routing number information. I think I can answer that one for people because I just myself did the submission night before last as well, and it was quick and easy, and I was pleased. So the SBA lenders can be on the Minnesota SBA website, or we're planning to send out a link to it as well. And then the next question is 3 to 5 days, $10,000 coming back to people on this new part that is the advance that's really been added this week. And the question is from which date, and is that specifically the submission date?
So keep in mind so the advance is up to $10,000. It kind of depends on the amount of the that they're looking for as the final loan. So it's an up to $10,000, and it should be 3 to 5 days. I believe it's from the date that the application is received. But you know what? Now that I'm saying that, I'm not sure I've actually had anybody, they say 3 to 5 days, but no, I don't think anybody actually said the date, whether it's from the date of approval or the date of receipt. So I will look that up for you, Matt. That's a question
Okay.
I'm going to have to get an answer to.
We'll see about if we can find that. Given the volume of applications, I'm sort of thinking that unless this is automated, where there isn't a human that gives it consideration, that $10,000 advance may have to wait until there's a person on the disaster end that, from the SBA that actually, takes some sort of step engaging in your submission, which could be that might take a couple days in and of itself or something, but we'll come back with more of a clarification. That actually is the end of our loan questions, I believe, and I don't think I missed any other than those that were repetitive or something to the same tune. So feel free to get in touch with the Small Business Development Center if you think that either your question wasn't answered or that you are hoping to ask additional questions. And over the next several working days, I'm certain that programs like PPP are going to become fully documented and likely available in that complete documentation. Once we're able to consume it, should be able to help steer people even further and better after that. Twyla, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you very much. I really appreciate you sitting in. So your Minnesota SBA office supporting small businesses and all the people on our call, as well as, for that matter, our SBDC office, myself included, for instance. And we can't thank you enough. We appreciate you sort of cutting through some of the noise to help us understand it better.
You're welcome, Matt. We appreciate, I just want to say to the small business owners out there, I have talked to bunches of you over the last 2 weeks, and I think I'm constantly amazed how resilient and how optimistic people are. So, you know, just keep that up. SBA and the state of Minnesota and all of your cities and your counties are going to be doing everything that they can to make sure that you make it through.
All right, thank you very much. We are not done, folks. So if that does sound like a closing, it's just for the loan part of this.